All right, so today we are diving into something pretty interesting. We're going to take a look at what it takes to become a vendor, for Saudi Aramco.
Okay.
Now you might be thinking, why? Why is this important to me? Why should I care? Well, imagine this. You're a business, right? And you're looking to land a deal, maybe a big deal, with a company that's a global giant, a company with pockets deeper than like the Mariana Trench. We're
Yeah.
talking about like life-changing contracts here. And there's always a but, right? There's a catch. Saudi Aramco, they have a very, very rigorous vendor qualification process. Getting that coveted vendor ID, it's kind of like getting the keys to the kingdom. So to help us unpack this whole thing, we've got some articles we're going to look at. And even an interview with a company that actually cracked the code. And trust me, their journey, it's pretty enlightening. They went from feeling like completely lost in a sea of paperwork to actually securing their vendor ID. And it all started with this company called CyberSafe Technology. Have you heard of them?
I have, yeah. They specialize in cybersecurity compliance, which is a pretty hot topic these days. What's so interesting about this whole thing to me, this, becoming a vendor for Saudi Aramco, is that it really highlights how much things have changed for businesses. It's not just about, what you offer anymore, your product or service. It's about proving that you're trustworthy, especially, in this world that's so driven by data and technology.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head there because that proof, in this case, it comes in the form of this thing called the Cybersecurity Compliance Certificate, or they call it the CCC for
Right.
short.
Right.
Now, look, I'm no tech whiz. I'll be the first to admit that. But even I could tell from the interview that just the mention of the CCC, it made this company like
Oh, I
nervous.
bet. And understandably so. We're not talking about some small thing.
Yep.
These certificates, these aren't just a formality or something you just get because you filled out the form.
Yeah.
They represent a real commitment, right, to maintaining the highest level of cybersecurity. And that's absolutely non-negotiable for a company like Saudi Aramco. I mean, think about it.
Mm.
They are responsible for some of the most critical infrastructure in the world. A single cybersecurity breach, it could be catastrophic.
Yeah, it's like the difference between having like, a basic lock on your front door versus, having a state-of-the-art security system with like laser beams and motion sensors and you name it.
Exactly.
So how did they go from feeling so overwhelmed to actually conquering this whole CCC challenge?
Well, that's where cybersecurity technology, that's where they come in.
Okay.
And what I find really interesting is how they approach this whole thing. They didn't just do the whole like one-size-fits-all approach.
Hmm.
They actually sat down with the company and they really took the time to understand their specific business. Like, where are the vulnerabilities? What are the specific risks they face? And then they mapped out like a tailored strategy just for them.
Wow. So they did like a deep dive of their own.
Exactly.
Okay. So they helped the client gather all the necessary documents, right? Like company registration, financial statements, all that fun stuff.
Yeah, all the fun stuff.
Now, that's got to be pretty tedious for most companies, I imagine.
Oh, absolutely. It's a huge pain. And it's not just tedious, it can be incredibly complex, even for seasoned businesses, companies that have been around for a while. It's easy to get tripped up by all the intricate details, the requirements, especially when you're dealing with expanding into new markets, like, going into business with Saudi Aramco. I mean, for example, did you know that even like minor discrepancies in a company's financial statements, just like a small little error, that can raise all sorts of red flags during a vendor qualification process?
Really? Wow. See, I had no idea it was that detailed.
Oh, yeah.
It sounds like having a guide, someone who knows like the ins and outs of this whole process, it's pretty invaluable.
Yeah, you really need someone who knows exactly what they're doing, someone who's been there, done that. And that's exactly what CyberSafe provides,
Yeah.
essentially. Expert navigation through this complex, often bureaucratic landscape.
Yeah, because I imagine it gets like really complex from here.
It does. It really does. And it highlights how important it is to have that specialized knowledge, especially in a situation like this with like all this cybersecurity stuff. I mean, I'll be honest with you, cybersecurity alone, sometimes I feel like it's like a whole other language.
Oh,
It's a very complex field, and for good reason. The stakes, they are unbelievably high, particularly for a company like Saudi Aramco.
yeah.
I mean, think about their operations. They're a prime target for cyber attacks constantly,
Yeah.
just given, how critical a role they play in the entire global energy landscape.
So it's not just about like checking boxes and going through the motions. It's about actually building a fortress around your data.
Yes, 100%. And that's where that cybersecurity assessment, the one that CyberSafe does, that's where it becomes really, really crucial. Because they weren't just like, looking for existing vulnerabilities. They're also thinking ahead. They're trying to anticipate future threats. It's like if you imagine like a castle,
Yeah.
right? You're not just like, reinforcing the walls for today's siege engines. You're thinking about what they might invent in the future. You got to stay one step ahead.
And the client in the interview, they mentioned something about CyberSafe, like actually finding a vulnerability, and it had to do with their remote access protocols.
Yeah.
Something about like outdated software being like a backdoor for hackers.
Oh, yeah. That's
Yeah.
very, very common. That's a very common thing, and it's often overlooked, I think. Companies will spend all this time and energy on upgrading their main systems, which makes sense,
Right.
but they kind of forget about those, like, little things, those little details, like remote access points or things like that.
Right.
And those little details can become, like, entry points for, you know, malicious actors, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not good. So CyberSafe, by, going in there, identifying that, and then helping them rectify that, they probably saved this company a massive, massive headache down the line.
Huge.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. It's a good reminder, I think, for everyone listening that like cybersecurity, it's not a one and done type of thing. It's an ongoing process.
Totally.
100%.
100%. It's a constantly evolving landscape.
Yeah.
And it's not just about the technology either. It's also about, like, your people, your processes. Like, I wonder, did they talk about whether CyberSafe, did they help them implement, like, better password policies, for instance,
No.
or maybe like employee training programs?
Right.
Because often, you know what it is? It's the human element. The people are often the weakest link when it comes to cybersecurity, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Okay, so let's say, you've got your cybersecurity in check, you've got all your documents gathered, you're feeling good about everything. What happens next? I imagine the actual like vendor registration process is probably not a walk in the park.
No, no, it is not. You are absolutely right about that. It can be a very, very, I don't know what the word is, like labyrinthine process.
Right.
Even for companies that are, very experienced and used to dealing with, bureaucratic hurdles, it can be very, very daunting. And that's really where, again, that's another area where having a guide like CyberSafe is just, it's invaluable. They mentioned something about a vendor portal, I think, in the interview, right?
They did, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so Saudi Aramco has this dedicated online platform, this vendor portal. And that's where basically everything related to vendor registration and procurement
Yeah.
all runs through this portal. So you have to imagine, like, this massive online hub. And this is where companies go to, submit all their documents, and then they can track their applications. And this is also how they communicate with Saudi Aramco representatives.
Hmm.
So everything's centralized in this one spot.
Okay.
It's like a one-stop shop.
Gotcha. And I'm guessing like navigating this portal is probably not as easy as like, ordering something on Amazon.
You would hope, but
Yeah.
no, not quite. Not quite as straightforward, unfortunately. It has its own set of, rules and procedures and potential pitfalls that you can fall into. Like, for instance, just a very simple example, but, you submit a document and it's not in the right format, or maybe you missed, like, filling out, like, one crucial little field.
Right.
Something like that could lead to huge delays or even, like, outright rejection.
Wow.
Yeah.
And keep in mind, this is just one piece of this whole puzzle, this whole thing we're trying to put together.
Yeah. So CyberSafe, are they essentially like your guide through this like digital maze to make sure you don't take any wrong turns? Yeah. That's a great way to put it. Yeah. They essentially hold your hand through the whole thing, making sure that, your application is submitted perfectly and that any communication you have with Saudi Aramco is, clear, it's concise, and it, meets all of their requirements. So they're essentially acting as like, a project manager overseeing this entire vendor registration journey for you from the very beginning to the very end, which I imagine is very appealing to companies who are, trying to juggle multiple priorities, because this frees them up to really focus on their, day-to-day business, trusting that the experts are handling this, critical but complex part of the process.
Yeah. It sounds like they're taking on a huge burden for these companies, which is probably pretty appealing.
Yeah, I mean, nobody wants to deal with this stuff if they don't have to. So
Yeah.
it's a win-win.
Right.
They get to focus on what they're good at. And CyberSafe handles this. It's all about, that expression, work smarter, not harder.
Exactly.
That's what this is. It's about leveraging expertise strategically so that, businesses can do what they do best and leave this to the people who do this every single day.
Makes sense. I mean, why try to be an expert in everything when you can just, partner with someone who already is?
Exactly.
And this is where the story gets really good because after all that work, our client actually got their Saudi Aramco vendor ID.
They did. That's awesome.
Yeah.
It's really a testament to, not only their commitment to this whole thing, but also to just the power of like a good partnership,
Yeah.
strategic partnerships.
Mm.
Because obtaining that vendor ID, that is not a small thing. It's a significant achievement.
Yeah. It's like getting an invitation to some like exclusive club where
Yes.
where the membership comes with like access to these incredible opportunities.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
It opens doors to like, I don't know, you can almost think of like a whole network of like potential clients and collaborators
Yeah.
who are all, operating at the top of their game, right? The
Mhm.
highest level of like the global energy market.
Right.
So it's not just about, getting one contract. It's really about securing your place,
Hmm.
right? Securing like a foothold in this, very competitive arena.
And it sounds like from the interview that CyberSafe didn't just like, get them to the finish line and then just like drop the mic and walk away. They mentioned something about ongoing support, right?
Yeah. Yeah, they do. And that's actually really important. It's something that I think a lot of times is overlooked,
Yeah.
because the journey doesn't stop once you have that ID in hand. That's just the beginning. You still have to, make sure you're maintaining compliance, keeping up with all the latest changes and the rules and regulations, navigating like, evolving requirements.
Yeah.
And even just understanding like the cultural nuances of doing business, right?
Mhm.
Like in the Saudi Arabian context specifically, there's a lot that goes into it. It's not just, okay, I have my ID, we're good. There's a lot more to it than that.
Right. It's like they say it's not about getting to the top of the mountain. It's about like what you do when you're up there. Yeah.
Just exactly. Exactly. And having like that trusted advisor, like having a cyber safe there with you by your side, it makes all the difference, right? Because they can kind of act as like I don't know, like a cultural liaison almost, like helping you bridge the gap between, how like international business is done and then like the specific way that things work in Saudi Arabia, right?
Right.
Because it's not always the same.
Right. Right. Yeah. So for everyone listening, like what's the main takeaway here? Like what can someone listening to this take away from this whole story, this company's experience?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway here is actually twofold.
Okay.
So the first one is never underestimate how complex it can be to break into a market, especially one as demanding as Saudi Aramco.
Right.
Like it takes a lot. It takes planning. It takes a real commitment to cybersecurity, obviously,
Mhm.
and it takes having a very, very deep understanding of not only the technical landscape, but like we were just talking about, the cultural landscape as well. So number one, don't underestimate it, and number two, recognize the value. Like really recognize the value of specialized knowledge.
Okay.
Because partnering with experts like the folks over at CyberSafe, that can really be the difference between like really struggling your way through this whole process versus, navigating it strategically and coming out, on top, right?
Right.
And ultimately saving yourself a lot of time, a lot of resources, and probably a lot of headaches along the way.
Right. It's a good reminder that like, we don't have to be the experts in absolutely everything, but we should at least, try to be experts in finding the right people to help us, achieve those things, really.
100%. Yeah. It's all about like, building that network, surrounding yourself with people who are really good at what they do, and then leveraging that collective expertise to achieve these really ambitious goals, right?
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, this company's journey, it really just shows us that even challenges that seem, absolutely insurmountable, even those can be overcome with the right approach and the right partners.
Yeah. That's awesome. That's a great place to end it, I think. So, to everyone listening, next time you're facing a challenge and it seems like, impossible, like you're trying to climb Mount Everest, remember this story because it might just inspire you to, find your own cyber safe, find those experts, those people who can guide you through those really complex situations and then help you, reach those new heights.
I love it because in the end, success often comes down to recognizing that we don't have to do everything ourselves. Collaboration is key, strategic partnerships, and having that willingness to learn from others, from people who've already been there and done that. Those are the keys to really unlocking possibilities that we might not have ever thought were even possible before.
That is a fantastic note to end on. So that wraps up this deep dive. Until next time, everyone, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep pushing beyond the familiar. because you never know what you might accomplish.